Hey there, this is Andrew, and today I'm going to bring you the a set review for Logos in Dark Tidings. And boy, it's been a while. I released a Shadows House set review with Andrew Grandstaff, a Grand student, aka One Star Peeps, 5 Star Games. Anyway, that was really great. And then uh, I think a lot of excitement kind of petered out for me, for a lot of people. I was still plugging along playing, but I think a lot of people had their excitement reduced, and it just seemed like it was difficult to get people to come on and uh, who would I've invited. So I actually don't think I did invite anybody, but it just didn't seem like there was people actively engaged. So it fell through. I think excitement's back, thanks to the GameFound campaign. I did record my own run-throughs with Unfathomable and Untamed, and I had done Logos, but lost the video. So I'm redoing this one with an explanation because I referenced the explanation in the Untamed video. Anyway, the point is, I'm back. I'm doing this with Winds of Exchange. I really will try to get guests on for all of these. No promises, but that is what I'll try for. But I wanted to keep the record up of actually having these out there. So um, I'm not, I'm certainly not the best player in the world, but I do play competitively and get some wins, and so hopefully my insights will be beneficial. And heck, I think anybody's insights are good. So if you have thoughts, don't be shy about sharing them on the video. So without going into news, I'll just say I'm excited that for set 6, for Winds of Exchange, when I do these, I'm going to get to add back on my question about anomalies because we will be having anomalies. And is that it? Yeah, we'll get to add back anomalies. Oh, and we'll get to add on a question about token creatures, obviously. So that should be fun. But for now, I just have my uh, 4 questions that I like to ask. So we'll go through those. If I open up a Dark Tidings deck and I'm at, let's say, a sealed event, and I'm looking at, okay, what are the next houses I'm going to see? What am I most hoping to see? I'm most hoping to see Star Alliance because a logo Star Alliance is likely to be really fast, and I think the sweet spot for Dark Tidings is actually in fast and rushing. There's not enough potential for awesome control in Dark Tidings, so speed is really the way to go. And I think there's some control, but anyway, I think speed's really the way to go. And Logo Star Alliance delivers it. Untamed would be like a close second because they're also really fast and bursty. Okay, what abilities do I expect Logos is going to give me in a deck? Drawing, archiving cards, some wacky stuff around, who knows what you'll get. I'm hoping for some control. Might have some cost increase in there. I might have some combos that play off of getting to do a lot. And lastly, I'm trying to figure out what this ghost thing is here. Hmm. Wow, we are really live here. Anyway, and so some combos that rely on doing a lot of stuff, and then interestingly enough, in Logos there are 2 key cheats in this set, which is a lot. Um, yeah, so there you go. That's what I would expect. My favorite combo in the set in Logos, my favorite just within Logos 2-card combo is Tide Warp plus Mecha Buoy. I'll explain how that works when we get to them, but it really is annoying for non-Dark Tidings decks to have to deal with. If I could have any legacy, I would want Neutron Shark, because there's no artifact control at all in Dark Tidings Logos. Even remote access, we don't have. There's Hornswoggle and Shadows instead. So having Neutron Shark I think would be awesome. It's just a great card, period, but it would be extra nice to have in this set. And if I could have any Maverick, it'd be Reaper So. Although Phase Shift kind of lets you have any Maverick you want, but still, if I could pick a Maverick, I think I'd want Reaper So because there's so many good Reap effects here in Logos, and getting to trigger them on the same turn is beneficial, which is why Rooftop Laboratory is so good. But we'll get there. All right, standard order here. We're doing this numeric, so it's going to go commons up to rares. I'm going to cover Evil Twin creatures along with their good twin counterparts. So let's get into it. All right. Theory or conjecture is an action. It doesn't have a pip because it's one of those things in Dark Tidings where instead of giving you a pip, it gives you two choices, each of which would get a pip if they were their own card. So it gives it a little more utility, but I wish it had the pip. Anyway, play, choose one, either archive the top two cards of your deck, like Eclectic Inquiry, or play the top card of your deck, like Wild Wormhole. Again, both of which have pips. Here you get to pick one or the other. Talmadge Steelheart is a 3-power human. When you play it, you give it a +1 power counter for each card you have played this turn, including Talmadge Steelheart. Kind of cool, but in real life, it's just kind of a nothing burger. You get a large creature, and in my experience, doesn't do much. The Evil Twin version, on the other hand, has play, deal damage to an enemy creature equal to the number of cards you've played this turn. I think that's probably more beneficial. Still not wow, but probably more beneficial, actually. All right, Submersive Principle. This is the tidy version of Effervescent Principle. Effervescent Principle, of course, says each player loses half their amber, rounding down the loss, but then you get a chain. Here it's just each player loses one, but if the tide is high, then it's half, rounding down the loss instead, and there's no chain attached, so could be better. Static Charge is an upgrade with an Amber Pip. This creature gains at the start of your turn, deal 2 damage to each of this creature's neighbors. This is such an interesting one. I really like this. I did get a deck with a Legacy Shoulder Id, and if you put this on the Shoulder Id gets basically steal 1 at the start of every turn as long as it has a neighbor, which is kind of cool. Science is an action, no Amber Pip. For the remainder of the turn, after you play another action card, you gain an Amber. If you can really combo this, that could be a real big gainer. In my experience, though, it's just so infrequent that this actually does anything. So I think, combine this with theory or conjecture. Theoretically, you might be getting something good going, but in practice, it just doesn't seem to work very often. There was a deck I looked at a long time ago that had like 3 copies of this and 3 copies of Phase Shift, and then, okay, maybe you get it cooking, but it just doesn't work very often in my experience. P.I. Sweven is a 2-power human scientist with Reap. If the tide is high, draw 3 cards. That's really powerful. Reap, draw 3 cards is super good, and it's 1 power more than Babbling Bibliophile. It just, you have to have the tide to have that work. It's probably worth gaining the tide just for this effect. Usually people will kill it, though. And this is one example of where, if you had Reaper So, or some way to reap the turn you play it, really nice. Because it's generally going to end up dead. But if you can pull it off, that's a really nice effect. The Evil Twin version, same stats, but the reap effect is if the tide is high, your opponent discards a random card from their hand, so it becomes like Toxin. That's fine. This is clearly a worse Toxin, though. Toxin's 3 power and doesn't have the condition. Alright, Phase Shift this is back from Coda. Play, it's an action that says play, you may play a non-Logos card this turn. That could be really good. I really am a fan of Phase Shift. Yeah, I've always liked it. It's always been good. Old Egad is a 1 power creature, a 1 power cyborg with 2 armor. It has destroyed, ward each of its neighbors. This is nice. It's difficult to like pull this off with the right timing, partially because of that armor, but it can be useful. Usually for your opponent, there are ways they can play around it though. So most of the time, this is just underwhelming for my experience. The Evil Twin version is 3 power with no armor instead, and it has destroyed, enrage each enemy creature. That's probably more useful, actually. When your logos, I don't know that you want to necessarily be enraging all the enemy creatures because that really means your creatures are going to die and not get to reap, but still, I think that's a pretty decent effect. It's at least preventing them from doing anything, well, from reaping. Information exchange back from Worlds Collide. It's an action that says play, steal 1. If your opponent stole Amber from you on their previous turn, then you steal 2 instead. So if they just stole from you, you steal an extra 1. Otherwise, you just steal 1. That's fine. Infomorph is a 4-power mutant back from Worlds Collide. Has enhance 2-drop pips. That's it. That's all. Is what it is. Kind of cool, but the 4-power body when it's actually on the board is kind of boring. Not bad really for fighting or sitting around and reaping, but a little underwhelming. All right, Hydro Cataloger is this one's interesting. It's an artifact with an amber. It's an item. It says after a player raises the tide, they archive the top card of their deck. This is super interesting when you are playing with 2 decks that are both from Dark Tidings because you tend to be fighting over the tide. This might fire several times. Maybe it sets up some interesting turns for both of you. This is a really nice balanced effect. In games against non-Dark Tidings decks, it kind of just sits there because usually, unless you really can force them to take the tide, it's sitting there. You take the tide once, maybe you archive a card once, and then nothing. So a little underwhelming when you're playing against a non-DT deck. When you're playing against DT decks, super fun and interesting. Final analysis. This is a board wipe, and it's an interesting and fun one. It's an action. It says play, destroy a creature. Notice the theme, no Amber Pip. Anyway, when you play it, you destroy each creature. Each player draws a card for each creature they control that was destroyed this way. So, I mean, really, the same effect as Gateway to Dees, but instead of getting chains, you draw, but so does your opponent. That's super interesting. When they bring Logos back, I hope this card comes back because it's just a really interesting card. Can really set up some fun combos, but also sets up your opponent. So I just think it's a fun, interesting card all the way around. I really like this one. Edai back from Worlds Collide, 3-power AI scientist with play, archive a card, and it says that your opponent's keys cost +1 for each card in your archives. So this is really nice for boosting the key cost. You also get archive out of it, so you're setting yourself up. It's great. The problem is, in Worlds Collide, you had cards like Interdimensional Graft in Logos and Too Much to Protect in Shadows to back this up. So you can push up the key cost, put on pressure, and then when Edai dies, drop the hammer and take a lot of that extra amber that you forced them to build up. But without those kind of forcing functions, there's some more submersive principle, but other than that, there really aren't scaling amber control options. Um, so I think it diminishes the value of Edai quite a bit. Again, in the set, against another deck in the same set, it's very strong because it's a great option in a set where there maybe aren't a ton of great options, but compared to what it could do in Worlds Collide with that support, just a little lacking. Bilge Warden is a 2-power human scientist with play reap. If the tide is high, your opponent raises the tide. Otherwise, you raise the tide. So that's interesting. That could be really good with Hydro Cataloger. Also, if you have cards that are triggering off of the tide, this is a way to force it to pass back and forth. Sometimes it's just a free raise it for yourself, which is fine. I think this card is fine. But if you get it in deck without a lot of tide effects, then it's really, again, a nothing. If you get it in a card with a lot of tide effects, then that's okay, but are you relying on this? It's kind of, it's tough. All right, Osterella Seaborg is a 4-power robot. So big body there, or decently big, and it has Reap, deal 2 damage to a creature. If this damage destroys that creature, then raise the tide. Another Tide Raiser. It's okay. It's slow. It's iffy. Armadrone. Think about Bat Drone to compare this to. Bat Drone's 2 power, no armor, has skirmish and fight steal 1. This also has fight steal 1, but only 1 power, 3 armor, no skirmish. It's interesting. This might be a little harder to kill, but it also, if the opponent just has a big creature, then of course this will die, whereas the Bat Drone actually had a chance to skirmish and do okay. The Evil Twin version has no armor, 3 power, and fight steal 2. If your opponent has a bunch of elusive creatures, I guess this is good. Otherwise, this is very, very iffy. But if they have elusive, yeah, that'd be fantastic. All right, we're into the uncommons. And the first one we're going to see here is Think Twice. Think Twice is an action that says play an action card from your discard pile, then purge it. That's a super cool effect. This could be an off-house card that you play. This could be really good, a really good card that you're getting a second go-round with. I really like this. It's whatever the best action card in your discard pile is. That's good. This is a fun one. Professor Garwin is a 3-power human scientist with elusive that says Reap. You may choose a card in your archives and put it into your hand. I don't find this super valuable. I guess if you play it with theory or conjecture, you could get some value out of it. Otherwise, the number of times where this is what I want, it seems low. So I don't care for this card very much. It does come with automatically at least 1 copy of theory or conjecture. I am quite confident because I got it as a legacy or as a Maverick once, and I even got the theory or conjecture Maverick. The Evil Twin version is only 2 power and has skirmish instead of elusive, and has fight. You may choose a card in your archives and put it into your hand. Again, just not a very useful effect. Maybe I'm comparing with like Project ZYX that plays a card out of your discard. That's definitely then you're getting house cheating out of it. But Garwin, very iffy. All right, Positron Bolt, back from Coda. I love this card. It's an action with an amber. When you play it, you deal 3 damage to a flank creature, deal 2 damage to its neighbor, and then 1 damage to the second creature's other neighbor. So you're going in from the end, 3, 2, 1. Very cool, and I love the art. Novu Archaeologist, also back from Coda, is a 4-power cyborg scientist with action. Archive a card from your discard pile. That can be useful. It just depends. If you're running a deck that has super, certain very high-powered cards, this is great. Otherwise, it just kind of ends up being a 4-power body. But because remember, generally you're choosing not to reap in order to do this, so that makes it a little iffier. But can be a very, very good effect. In Coda, you had silly combos like you could control the weak, Dominator Bobble this to put the control the weak back in your archives or something like that. Here, there's nothing quite so bad. Mind Bullets, I do not like. It's an action, no amber. It says play, deal 1 damage to each creature for each card you have played this turn. Well, guess what? You're probably killing all your Logos creatures. This, you want to play it late so you get a higher number, but that means you've already played your creatures. It just doesn't feel good to me. I don't love Mind Bullets. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't like it. All right, Mechabooey. So here's an interesting card, and we'll see Tide Warp later. But Mechabooey is interesting. It's an artifact with an amber, and it says at the start of each player's turn, if the tide is high for that player, they gain an amber. This one is really nice to have against non-Dark Tidings decks because if you get the Tide raised, you have one, maybe I've seen decks with two. Have I seen a deck with three? There's got to be. Anyway, you got one, two, three of these out there. You have the Tide raised. You're just getting free Amber, and it really puts pressure on the opponent to do something, to raise the Tide. If they have artifact control, that's a thing, but generally speaking, people don't have a ton of artifact control, so they're really going to be tempted to raise the Tide to deal with this, and that puts you in a better situation, so I think it's a good card. Isotropic Core is an artifact with an amber. It's an item. It says each friendly creature gains hazardous 1. That's really interesting. It's a little weird for Logos, but I really like it. I think it's a fun effect and just changes the math a little bit. So that's cool. I have never seen it be really good, but it's very interesting and fun, I think. All right, Forgive or Forget. This is another really strong recursion card in Logos. If you think about it, recursion has tended to be more of an untamed thing, but in Dark Tidings, we actually got more of it in Logos. So that is interesting. So Forgive or Forget is an action. Again, no Amber Pip, but it says choose one. Either archive 2 cards of different types from your discard pile, or purge up to 2 cards from each discard pile. And of course, you're going to be choosing to purge your 2 worst cards, or none, but I think you should probably push yourself to purge your 2 worst cards from your discard pile and purge your opponent's 2 best cards from their discard pile, if you're doing it that way. Or do the archive 2 cards of different types and set yourself up to be more of a threat in the coming turns. Either way, this one gives you a really wide space for making choices, and I like that. It does feel a little bad to have that purge 2 cards, and they're not losing Amber because we're so used to Infernus, but Infernus is crazy, so this is reasonable and pretty good. But again, no Amber Pip. Come on. All right, Fila the Researcher is a 1-power human scientist with elusive. That says after a creature is played adjacent to Fila the Researcher, draw a card. And Fila's been around since AOA, so no stranger to the game. But that's pretty interesting. I don't think there are deployed effects in Logos in this set, but there are in some other houses, so you could potentially even get a little value out of that extra draw. Okay, Eureka, also back from AoA. Eureka is a fantastic card. It's an action with an amber. It has alpha, so it has to be the first thing you do in your step 3. But when you play it, you gain 2 and you archive 2 random cards. Well, gain 3 amber for playing it, archive 2 cards is great. When this came out, I thought it was kind of crazy because I was like, why don't you just have 3 pips if you're going to do that? And anyway, it seems like a strong effect, but why don't you just have 3 pips? Then Infernus came out and realized, wow, this is actually pretty good that it's gain 2 instead of 3 pips. So, yeah, really strong, and just archiving that much, so good. Easily one of, if not the best first turn plays available. If you're first player, certainly. Okay, you got a lot of archives, don't know what to do with it. Well, here's Dataforge. Dataforge is an action. This is back from Worlds Collide. It's an action with an amber. When you play it, you may forge a key at plus 10 amber, plus 10 current cost, reduced by 1 for each card in your hand. So it's a slightly worse version of key abduction, especially because it doesn't return cards, which would boost it even more. But it has the benefit of being in Logos, which tends to just have a lot of archive and draw, so maybe you get it into a situation. But I feel like it's hard to get into a situation where you can data forge. Usually if you do, you've been archiving all game and you finally get key 3 with it. So when you do that, it's great, but most of the time I feel like it's actually pretty hard to pull this off. Brain Eater is a 6-power cyborg that says after an enemy creature is destroyed, fighting Brain Eater, draw a card. This is back from Coda. It's a fun, interesting card. Like to have some beefy creatures in Logos. I think this is nice. All right, Bouncing Death Quirk, back from Coda. It's an action, no Amber Pip, but this is a good one. It says play destroy an enemy creature and a friendly creature, so you're destroying an enemy and a friendly. And then you may repeat that effect as many times as you like, as long as it's possible to repeat the entire effect. So if your opponent has 4 creatures and you have 3, destroy one of each, destroy one of each. Now it's 2 to 1. You can choose to do another one, but now you have none, they have one. You can't repeat the whole effect, so you couldn't leave that last or kill that last one. That's how it works. But you could have stopped it after the first enemy and friendly creature were destroyed too. But this is really nice. The selective destruction is great because you're destroying all your worst creatures and all their best creatures, of course. And it's sequential, so you can even do like a kill their Ludo and then kill their creature with the amber on it, and you'll get the amber. Okay, Binary Moray is a 5-power AI beast, and it says Reap, archive a card. That's a strong effect. Think about Ganymede Archivist, which has this effect but is only 3 power, so that's great. It says after you raise the tide, you ready Binary Moray, but after your opponent raises the tide, you exhaust it. So it does some interesting stuff with the tide that's kind of thematic, I guess. And kind of cool. You can sometimes get to trigger it multiple times in a turn if you time things right, but your opponent can also like make you end up using it less depending if they time things right. So it creates interesting interactions. It's good. Okay, there's an evil twin version. Same stats, but it has skirmish and no reap effect, and it then has the same after you raise ready, after your opponent raises exhaust. So instead of that reap effect, it has skirmish. I'd rather have the reap effect, to be honest with you. Oh well. Okay, Archon's callback. This is a weird one. It's an action, no Amber Pip. Play, draw 5 cards. Seems really good, right? But it's Omega, so most of the time you're going to end up playing this with like 3 cards in your hand. You'll draw to 8, which is fine, but not that good. And then you can't play any, so any Logos cards you drew, you can't use. It's just it's a little iffy. Um, Sometimes it can be really good if you get it in a case where you already had a bunch of cards in your hand from other Logos effects. Maybe it's worthwhile, but it can be it can be pretty iffy. Anomaly Exploiter. This is back from Coda as well. It's an artifact, an item. It says action, destroy a damaged creature. That could be good. Zenzik is back from Worlds Collide and Mass Mutation. It's a 4-power cyborg leader with 2 armor. It's the leader for Logos, and when it's in the center of your battle line, it gives you 2 extra draw up to you drop to 2 more cards at the end of your turn. That's super strong. So this is nice. Happy to see it. All right, into is that a rare? That's a rare. So we're into the rares now. Vespelon Theorist back from Coda. Is a 2-power cyborg scientist with elusive that says Reap, choose a house, and reveal the top card of your deck. If the card you revealed is of the house you named, then you archive it and gain an amber, otherwise discard it. This is fine, but it's a little slow and underwhelming in the effect when you could have like a bot booked in that just plays a card. Okay, Universal Keylock is an artifact, an item. It has an amber pip on it, and it says that keys cost +3. But after a player forges a key, you destroy the key lock. If you time it right, this can give you a nice tempo advantage over your opponent, but it can be tricky to time right because your opponent may play around it. Usually, if they are just flat out racing you and winning, they're just going to go ahead anyway and it'll slow them down, but not very much. Otherwise, they can time it so you're the one who takes the hit. It could be a little bit of a bummer, depending on how that works out. Okay, so Tide Warp. This is the one I mentioned is really fun with Mecha Buoy. So remember, Mecha Buoy says that if at the start of your turn the tide is high for you, or if at the start of any player's turn the tide is high for them, they get an amber. Well, Tide Warp is an artifact and power, has an amber pip, and it says at the start of your turn, if the tide is high, your opponent raises the tide, otherwise you raise the tide. But the interesting thing is that both this and Mecha Buoy are start of turn effects. So, leaving out any other card effects, Tide Warp is going to have the effect of every other turn, the tide is going to be high for your opponent. So they'll get that 1 amber every other turn. But because it's a start of your turn effect, and Mechabooey is the start of each player's turn effect, so they're both trying to happen at the start of your turn. You get to pick which order. And on the turn where the tide is high for your opponent when they pass to you, you would choose to fire Tide Warp first, which will raise the tide, so that Mechabooey will in fact give you an amber. But on turns where the tide is already high for you, you would choose to fire Mechabooey first, and then fire Tide Warp. So effectively what it means is, if you have these two artifacts, Tide Warp and Mechabooey, Mechabooey is going to give you an amber every single turn no matter what. And your opponent will end up getting one every other turn. So that's pretty cool. Alright, the Howling Pit is an artifact with an amber. It's a location, and it says that each player refills their hand to one additional card during their draw card step. Back from Coda. Yeah, this is a fun, interesting card. It changes the game a little bit, but it's iffy because sometimes if your opponent has a decent deck, having an extra card in their hand can turn it into a great deck. So you got to be a little wary about that, but it makes the game more fun for sure. So I say do it. Okay, the Archivist is a 3-power cyborg, and it says if you archive it, you archive it face up. This is back from Mass Mutation, by the way. So if you archive it, you archive it face up. And while it's in your archives, instead of picking up all of your archives, you may choose to pick up any number of cards in your archives. So effectively, this says, hey, you might have cards of different houses in your archives. Usually, if you're doing a deck that has a lot of archive, you're trying to craft it so that you're putting one house in your archives, playing your other houses, and then you can have a big burst turn on the house that had all the cards in archives. But the archivist says, don't worry about it. If you get cards from multiple houses in here, you can just pull out the ones you want at the start of every turn and leave the others. So that can be really beneficial, and especially with so many archive off the top of your deck effects, it can be strong. I think it was stronger when Auto Encoder was in set, which was in Mass Mutation and not Dark Tidings, but it's interesting. I've never ended up having it be great, though. I think it's just a little too finicky. Okay, the SLRS Australis is an artifact and ship. It has an Amber Pip, and I love this one. It has action, exhaust up to 3 friendly Logos creatures, and for each creature exhausted this way, play the top card of your deck one at a time. That's a really cool effect, and it could combo with some other things, maybe, but in general, it's just really cool. Getting to do that 3 times in a row, it turns your creatures that maybe are lackluster, like your Talmadge Steelheart, into a cool engine. So I like this one, although it does depend on actually having creatures out, and sometimes with logos that's hard. But if you can do it, I think that's a really cool effect, and I would be sad not to see this in some future set. Okay, Ruins of Arconis. There's a number of treasures that belong to different houses. This is the one for Logos. It's an artifact and treasure. It has an amber pip on it. When you play it, you put 4 amber on it from the common supply, and you archive a card. And then it says, after a player plays their 6th card in a turn, if Ruins of Arconis is ready, you move each amber, which will be 4, from Ruins of Arconis to that player's pool. So the bummer here is your opponent gets a chance to do this before you would have a chance, because if you happen to play 6 cards, including this, well, it's not going to be ready, so you're not going to get the amber off of it. But hopefully, because you're in Logos, you can do a better job of hand shaping so you get to the point where you're able to play 6 cards before them. But it is a little bit of a risk. It's cool though. I like it. I like the treasure cards. I don't know that they're necessarily super competitive because of those risks that they introduce, but they're cool. So I like that. All right, Mobius Scroll. This is back from Coda, and it's an artifact and item. It says action, archive Mobius Scroll, and up to 2 cards from your hand. So essentially, on a Logos card, you play this, or on a Logos turn, you would play this, and then on your next Logos turn, you would action it to archive 2 cards. It's kind of a, nowadays feels like a pretty slow way to get through archives. So I've come to not love it so much, but it's an interesting one. I just feel like it's a little slow at actually getting work done. but it is about the same speed as a memory chip. It's just, I think, less reliable. All right, mind over matter is an action, and no Amber Pip, and this is back from Mass Mutation, and it says play, put each creature into its owner's archives. That's an interesting effect. I like that. Um, is it always good? Definitely not. Sometimes you do not want to play this. Sometimes you do. It just depends on the situation, but it's interesting, and I like that. Master the Theory, still terrible. It's been in every set except for Coda, and it's still a terrible card. It's an action with an amber, and it says play if there are no friendly creatures. You may archive a card for each enemy creature. Potentially you get a lot of archives in, but usually means you're losing. So I just find this card never does great work. Again, if it does much, then that's probably a bad sign. Okay, library card. Very interesting. This is back from Mass Mutation, but we know this is kind of mimicking Library Access from Coda. Library Access was an action that said play uh, for the remainder of the turn. Each time after you play a card, draw a card. And then they errated it because with certain combos it was too strong. They errated it to purge itself. And Library Card just has that built in. You purge it, and if you do, for the remainder of the turn, after you play a card, draw a card. Um, yeah, that's a nice effect. If you can combo this with other stuff, you're going to be really happy. It can be hard to combo this with other stuff, and I have not personally seen a Dark Titans deck that I can think of that uses this really well. I think this is more common to be super useful in Mass Mutation because of cards like Lethalogica. But I mean, there, Phase Shift and Theory or Conjecture. Theoretically, this should be able to be pretty useful. I just, like I said, haven't seen it be crazy. Okay, Knowledge is Power, always a fun card. It's an action, no amber when you play it. And here, this goes all the way back to Coda. This has been in every set except Mass Mutation. And this gives us, here's the choose one stuff. So that's actually been around since set one, that kind of archetype of card. Anyway, it says play choose one, either archive a card or gain one amber for each card in your archives. And if you are in a position where you feel like, yes, I want to gain that one amber per card in my archives, then you are in good shape because you still have the archives. But getting to archive a card is also not bad. So I like the flexibility here. I think this is a fine card. Okay, here's that other key cheat, Honors Keysis. It's an action with an amber, and it says play Forge a key at +7 current costs. Compare that to Data Forge, which was +10, and you're going to reduce that cost by 1 amber for each card you have played this turn, including this one. So already, Data Forge takes a card out of your hand when you play it because it takes itself out of your hand. Honors Keysis counts itself, so it's even a more favorable comparison. This is a pretty reasonable one to think you might pull off. And so it's a little bit of a bummer that if you do, it purges itself. But hey, if you're winning the game with it, you don't care. So I think this is a great card. I would love to have seen this at Uncommon and Data Forge at Rare, but that's okay. Um, yeah, Honors Keysis is good and fun, and it combos super well with stuff like Australis or Phase Shift or even Theory or Conjecture. Okay, now we're going to start to get into the control side of Logos because we really haven't seen a lot. We've seen a little Amber control, a little board control, but this is some hard control. Chronophage is a 3-power beast and robot that says that your opponent's creatures and artifacts gain Omega, which means basically the minute your opponent plays a creature, their step 3 ends. They ready and draw up and pass. So that's kind of cool. If you can get this down and protect it, you're pretty happy. This is a strong control card. It's just only 3 power and it's a rare, so you're probably not getting multiples. You need to protect it, blah blah blah. But if you can land it, that's pretty strong. Captain Creasage is a 6-power cyborg that says while you control another creature with elusive taunt poison, or skirmish, Captain Creasage gains that keyword. Great, except I just don't know what you do with that. I mean, let's say you have all 5 of those, then it's a big fat creature that does what? Fights or something once a turn. If you can't add like great fight effects or reap effects or something, then it's a little bit of a bummer. The Evil Twin version actually causes all creatures to lose those traits. But the interesting thing is, no, it is the same for elusive, taunt, poison, or skirmish, elusive, taunt, poison, or skirmish. So the good version will pull all those effects, will copy all those effects onto itself. The bad version turns them off for everybody. That's really interesting. Backup plan is an action, no amber. It says play for each creature your opponent controls in excess of you. So if you have 3 and they have 5, their excess would be 2, for example. You archive the top card of your deck. This is great because it doesn't matter how many cards you have in your deck. It's okay if you have 1 card. I will take this over Master the Theory all day, every day. This is a much better card. It's new in Dark Tidings. I don't know why they even kept Master the Theory in it. It's so bad. But of course, this doesn't have an amber. I don't think the effect is that crazy good. So anyway, probably should have an amber, but I certainly like it better than Master the Theory, even with Master the Theory having an amber. Academy Training is an upgrade that is back from both Worlds Collide and Mass Mutation that says if you control this creature, it belongs to House Logos instead of its original house, and it gives the creature Reap Draw a card. You got to be a little careful with how you use this, although I think it's less tricky in this set. But remember, when you put this on a creature, it becomes Logos and it loses its other house. So then you can reap with it probably right away, get that draw, maybe whatever other effect it has. But then you can't use it in its normal house. So you got to not forget that. And you might be tempted to think, oh yeah, I'll put this on an opponent's creature and it'll make it Logos and they don't have Logos. That'll be great. But no, it only does that effect, that it belongs to House Logos, if you control the creature. So if you put it on your opponent's creature, it does not change to House Logos, but it still gets the Reap effect. So you really would never want to put this on an opponent's creature. Okay, Vellum. We've seen Vellum and Hyde before. They've been in Worlds Collide and Mass Mutation. They're a pair, so I guess Hyde is the actual rare. Vellum then just comes automatically with it. Vellum's a 2-power human scientist. With Reap, archive a card. But if you control Hyde, then you archive 2 cards instead. Reap archive 2 cards is a really good effect. And it has this destroyed effect that when it's destroyed, you archive Hyde from your discard pile, and if you do, you also archive Vellum. So uh, Hyde has the opposite effect. So if one of these is already in your discard pile and the other one dies, they both end up in your archives. If they are both on your board and they die at the same time, the destroyed effects can't archive each other because they're not in the discard pile. So neither of them ends up archived. And Hyde is just 4 power, but also a human scientist and has a Reap draw a card instead of archive a card. And if you control Vellum, you draw 2 cards instead. So if you get both these, that's really great. They combo well together. Draw 2, archive 2. Usually that's not going to end up happening for you, but sometimes they kind of come back a bunch, so that's fun. Okay, now we're going to get into this is really the crowning achievement combo here. The rare card here in this combo is Dr. Varoctor. It's a 2-power human scientist with elusive that says Reap, put an upgrade or action card from your discard pile on top of your deck. Okay, that seems nice and innocent. That's a fun, good effect. It's good on its own. But if you get Dr. Varoctor, you automatically get these 3 other cards. That make it quite good. The first one is Rooftop Laboratory. This is an insanely good card in Logos. It's an artifact and location, and it says that each friendly scientist creatures enters play ready. Well, that means Dr. Varoctor enters play ready. It means Edai, P.I. Sweven, Hyde and Vellum. Not Armadrone, I don't think. But just a bunch of really good cards that want to reap come in ready. So that's a really strong effect already. But it gets worse or better. Reckless Experimentation is an upgrade with an amber, and it says this creature gains reap, play the top card of your deck. All right, that's cool too. And the fourth card is Groundbreaking Discovery, which is an action with an amber that says if you control Dr. Varoctor, Rooftop Laboratory, and Reckless Experimentation. So if you have all three of those other cards on the board under your control, then you destroy each card in play, unforge an opponent's key, and purge Groundbreaking Discovery. So now, purge Groundbreaking Discovery, that's kind of a bummer. This is a one shot, but unforging an opponent's key without giving them any amber or anything like that, that's super strong. And you completely wipe the board, which is could be good or bad depending on your situation. But anyway, it's a super strong effect. And imagine, I mean, let's say you have Groundbreaking Discovery in the discard pile, but you have these other three cards in your hand. First, you play the Rooftop Laboratory, then you play Dr. Varoctor, who would just play ready. You put the Reckless Experimentation, attach it to Dr. Varoctor, and then when he reaps, you choose to fire, the Dr. Varoctor ability first. With that ability, you put an action card. You would put Groundbreaking Discovery on top of your deck, and then with Reckless Experimentation's reap effect, you play it, and and you get that whole effect. Super good. So this is an amazing just intrinsic combo that you can get, and it just is like insane to me that Rooftop Laboratory is just so good on its own. So you end up with a very good setup for Logos. Um, yeah, that's that. This is probably the go-to combo in Logos, almost for sure, in Dark Tidings. But it's intrinsic, so yeah. Okay, that is that. I do think Logos is still, yeah, just so fun to play in Dark Tidings. Hard to get it as good as it is in some other sets, but still good and still very fun. Um, and it'll be interesting because we will not see Logos in set 6. It's not coming back yet, not for a while anyway. So that's interesting, and that'll be our first set ever without Logos. So this Dark Tidings Logos setup will be the last we see of them for a while. Hope you enjoyed. Hope this gave you some insight that helps you out, and I hope you'll get out there and forge some keys.